A few months ago, I came across something that would have been better left alone. But due to my carelessness, I found myself with a story worth telling. It was May, the day of my high school graduation. I was honestly surprised I had managed to get through my senior year without failing any classes, especially considering what was going on in my life outside of school. My little brother was sick, and he had been for years. He had just turned 14 that month and was already into his third year of treatment. Nothing was working, not the way his doctors wanted it to, and not the way we wanted it to. But still, the specialists were so hopeful. We were all on the hook every time they said they had a new option they could try. But nothing ever changed. Owen was diagnosed just after he turned 11, and since then, things at home have been tough. The playful little kid that bruised like a peach was not the somber little boy being poked and prodded in the hospital rooms. Things had to change, and he couldn't do all the things he used to do as his disease became more and more severe, and the treatments began to take a toll on him. Time passed, and things only became harder, and he was really sick. The therapy was getting to him. When he was home, he was constantly in the bathroom. He just couldn't keep anything down. He complained about the pain he was feeling, but only when he couldn't bear it any longer. He didn't want to make our parents feel any worse about the situation. It's hard enough having a child with cancer, but harder still to know that they aren't getting any better and each day is more painful than the last. He still smiled though, and he still joked around. He would laugh at me for attending school while his assignments were brought home to work on at his leisure. He was still a kid, just one that couldn't get out of bed without leaving a trail of bruises along himself. But a kid. We all tried our best to remain as positive as he was about this. It got harder to remain positive as time went on. Owen got sicker, and eventually our parents had to move him out of our home. Somehow, my parents managed to stay strong and hopeful through it all. They never seemed to despair too greatly over the fact that their child may never be cured. Owen was away from home only a few months before his body gave up. He was gone, and the years of hospitals, treatments, and tests were over. I was on my way home from my last day of school when I got the news. A few days later, we held the funeral. My mother was in hysterics, and half of Owen's school showed up to the service. It was heartbreaking. All those sad young children crying over the death of a child they had grown up playing with. Seeing how much his friends missed him only made me miss him more. I'd be an only child from now on. No younger sibling to teach or tease. At the same time, the service gave me a sort of peace. I felt like Owen would have loved seeing all the people he cared about come and bid him farewell. I felt like he had the best life that he could have had, and everything would be okay for him now that he had moved on. It was a little over a week later when I found something I shouldn't have. I had to search around the house to find shoes for the graduation ceremony, but my mother had recently gone on a cleaning spree. Everything in an unnecessary location that wasn't being used had to be put away in the closets, and I was trying to pull out a shoebox in the top of her bedroom closet when it hit me. Literally. A piece of paper from somewhere on top of the shelf had fallen. The corner poked me in the arm as it fell. I pulled the shoebox down and placed it on the ground, then stopped to inspect what had hit me. It was a picture of Owen, from when he was younger and hadn't been diagnosed. He looked so innocent. Just the trace of a smile beginning to form. I smiled back. The photo triggered happy memories of my brother as a joyful, illness-free child. The photograph seemed to waver as I stared at it, and suddenly I realized that it was moving. Owen's expression had turned into a full-tooth smile, and he seemed to be staring at me from within it. As the realization hit me, I heard the groan of wood shifting, and suddenly the shelf above me gave way and the contents came crashing down upon me. I winced in pain as a tumble of books and boxes rained down on top of me. I wasn't badly damaged, but I heard footsteps approaching to inspect the noise. I quickly tucked the photo into the shoebox that I had taken down and began organizing the things that had fallen. My father entered the room, and asked what I did, and I informed him that the shelf in the closet had collapsed. He mumbled something about fixing it later and me tidying it up, and then he walked away. I quickly placed the fallen objects neatly in the bottom of the closet and retreated to my bedroom with the shoebox. I stared at the picture again, wondering if I had just imagined the smile. It looked exactly as it had when I first picked it up. I put the photo in the dresser drawer and planned on reviewing it after I had gotten ready for my graduation ceremony. Once I was ready, I sat down in my bed and pulled the photo back out. I couldn't help but smile again about how innocent he looked, and then it happened again. Just a twitch. Maybe it was my imagination, but the hand that was raised in the photo appeared to wave just slightly. It was like he was saying hello. At that moment, my mother walked in the room to announce our departure, and I quickly tucked the photograph beneath my pillow. For some reason, I wanted to keep it to myself. I thought about the picture as we got in the car, wondering if I had some symptom of grief that made me imagine it had moved. We pulled out of the driveway and onto the road. I was just lost in thought of what had happened. My father was at the wheel, and suddenly we swerved hard. Too hard. We were off the side of the road and into the ditch before I even had a moment to register anything that had happened. My seatbelt locked before the car came to its abrupt stop, and I could feel the belt cut into me when I was thrown against it. The windshield had shattered, and we had hit a small cluster of trees in the ditch, and my mother was resting unconscious against her airbag. My dad seemed way less for wear. He had several cuts on his face, but he was coherent enough to pull his phone from his pocket and call the authorities. Red lights, blue lights, police cars, and ambulances. My father told me not to move, not to get out of the car, and I didn't want to anyways. I felt nauseated. The spot where the belt still dug into me stung, and there was pain in more spots of my body than I could even count. It was so much that I couldn't even tell where the pain was coming from. Maybe I went into shock. I don't remember much after the cars and the lights. I missed my graduation, and they offered to mail me my diploma. The hospital never seemed to be the right temperature. I was always uncomfortable. I was cut and bruised and had a mild concussion, along with one of my ribs being fractured. My father made it out almost exactly the same as me, but my mother didn't fare as well. She suffered some severe head trauma in the accident and would be in the hospital for a while to make sure that she got better. As we were leaving the hospital room, I nearly asked if we were going to see how Owen was next. But then I remembered that he hadn't been with us. Of course he hadn't been with us. My father and I went home, and I sat in my room staring at the picture. It remained still, looking like a perfectly normal photo of my brother. I sighed, intending to put the photograph back into my drawer, when my father walked into the room mid-question. "Have you seen—" He paused as he noticed the photo in my hand. "Where did you get that?" I shrugged and explained it, falling from the closet the other day, while holding it out for him to take. He gave me an odd squinted glance as he practically snatched the picture from my hand. "You shouldn't be touching things that don't belong to you," he warned me as he left the room. I didn't understand the strangeness over the photo, but somewhere in the back of my mind I questioned whether or not the picture moved for my father too. I listened as he walked away and heard him enter his room. I quietly snuck into the hallway and saw that his bedroom door had not been entirely shut. I crept forward and peered through the crack as he sat on his bed with his back mostly to the door. He stared at the photo while speaking quietly. "I know we're not supposed to do this anymore. I just miss you so much. This was supposed to make things easier, but it's not. I'm sorry. I hope you're okay, buddy." He was quiet after that, and his shoulders shook as though he was crying. My curiosity had long since faded, and I snuck back into my own room to collect my thoughts. I was unsure what my father had meant as he spoke to the picture. What was supposed to make things better? Did he see the picture move like I did? My thoughts were interrupted by the doorbell ringing, and I heard my father's heavy footfalls as he headed from his bedroom to the stairs. I got up to follow, curious to see who might be visiting us. I wasn't too far behind him when he started down the stairs. I saw clearly as he tripped over thin air and tumbled down almost the entire staircase. He was in a heap at the bottom, groaning in pain as I ran down the stairs to help him. He couldn't stand and I was too small to lift him. It struck me that whoever rang the doorbell could help him off the ground. I ran to the front door only to discover an empty porch. I was frustrated that whoever had come had been so impatient. I retreated back to the bottom of the stairs where my father was now attempting to get up without putting any weight on his left leg. I managed to get myself in a position where I could help him hobble his way around, and he instructed me to take him to the hospital. We had been home only for a few hours and now we were going right back to the hospital. He thought his hip might be broken. It takes almost a half an hour to get to the hospital, and I figured that it was enough time alone in a confined space where he couldn't walk away from the conversation. So I asked the question that was eating at me. What were you saying to that photograph earlier? What were you not supposed to do? I kept my eyes on the road while I waited for his response. You were listening? Casey, you're too young to deal with these things. His voice was strained from whatever injury his fall had caused. He proceeded into the usual lecture of how I was 18 now and things that involved the family and my brother should involve me. I had to know what was going on. He gave in. I'm not sure if it was because he didn't want to deal with my stubbornness during the drive or if he thought I really deserved to know. He told me that it began while they were in the process of discussing with Owen's doctors the issue of keeping him home or having him in the hospital full time. After a meeting with the doctors, they ran into a man outside of the hospital. He claimed that he had heard of Owen's case and had helped several families in similar situations before. He invited them to dinner and they discussed the offer. They didn't think anything was off at first. The dinner was expensive and the stranger spoke like a professional businessman. He advised my parents to put Owen in the hospital and he offered them a unique way to keep the happy spirit of their child ever present. Of course, they accepted the offer. Their son was sicker than they had ever experienced and they knew that he was dying. All they had to do was bring this man a photo of Owen before he got sick. It was that simple, and within a few days, the photo was in an envelope in our mailbox. But it was different. As Owen got sicker, the photo seemed to come alive more. My parents watched their son smile and play through the photograph while simultaneously watching him waste away in a hospital room. They didn't even bother questioning how it was possible. With the picture came a note, a warning. As their child faded away more, this memory would come to life in equal measures. If the child was to die, misfortune would fall upon the person who stirred his memory. The picture was consuming the parts of Owen's soul that were fading from his body. He was in the picture. I deserved this, my father pointed at his hip as he finished recalling the arrangement he'd made. I had no idea how to react to this information I had just received. I remember thinking that's it. The shelf, the car accident, the stairs, all after looking at this photo. To this day, I still don't understand how any of this could be possible. We pulled up to the hospital and I ran inside to get a wheelchair to bring my father in. He advised me to go home and rest for the night and then come back again in the morning when we could visit. I went home and thought about everything over and over again. Was it a demon? Didn't there have to be a catch to this deal? How far would the misfortune go? I feared losing more family members over the choice my parents had made, and I worried about Owen's soul. Was he truly at peace being trapped inside a picture? Stuck in a memory of life he can no longer live. It felt wrong, and by the time that I had to ride home, I made an irreversible decision. I entered the house and went immediately to my parents' room where the picture had been left behind. I hesitated for only a moment, wishing this would give my brother peace, before I flicked the lighter and set the photo on fire. I stared and held on until the fire got too close. The picture was ash before it hit the ground. I felt better. I felt like I had done the right thing. Like I had freed my brother from the selfish curse that my parents had agreed to. I slept that night hoping everything would be better, that the misfortune the photo had caused would be over. I visited my parents the next morning. My father had already rolled himself into a room by the time I got there. Apparently he had also filled her in on my knowledge of the photograph. She apologized profusely for not telling me. She claimed she felt terrible that she had kept a secret for so long. I told her that it was okay and everything was going to be okay now. I had burned the photo, and Owen should be free and we shouldn't have any more accidents. She gave me a weak smile and held onto my hand as my father hugged me. He was happy that I had had the sense to do what they couldn't bring themselves to do. We sat and chatted for a bit until my father wheeled away to get some snacks, and that's when my mother gestured for me to come close so she could whisper something to me. I wanted to destroy the picture right after Owen died. I was going to. I didn't tell your father about this, and you shouldn't either. He couldn't take it. The man, the one we made an arrangement with, he showed up at the office. I was about to go home and get rid of the photo, and he stopped me at my car. He told me if I destroyed it, then the soul would go back into the body, even if the body was dead. And I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I thought about that for a moment, and I almost shouted my first thought. He's alive. My mother shook her head and motioned for me to quiet down. Honey, don't you know how bodies are prepared for burials? He might have a soul, but he's certainly not alive. I sat down as the realization of what I'd done sunk in. We haven't talked about it since that day, and the photograph has been blacklisted in our home. It's been a few months since then, and I can't help but think about how it's my fault that my brother's soul will forever be stuck in a decaying body beneath 6 feet of dirt.